Welcome back to Sweet Sycamore. We are on episode 13 as we start chapter 7, as Esther is getting ready to walk into her final banquet with King Xerxes and Haman. Now, if you remember, we just left off with Haman having to honor Mordecai. And he goes home and he tells his wife, and his wife basically says, hey, you should probably stop messing with Mordecai and these Jewish people because they are God's chosen people, and this is not going to end well for you. But before they could come up with a plan, Haman is picked up to come to this final banquet. Now, I want us to think a little bit about what Esther is going through in this moment. Have you ever been so nervous to walk into a meeting or a dinner, or maybe if it's a date, and you have to have a really tough conversation, a conversation that you know is probably not going to go well? The few times in my life, probably several times in my life that I have had to do that, I am sick to my stomach. Like, I don't even sleep the night before because I am all twisted into knots of how is this going to go? How can I say this appropriately? How is the other person going to respond? And I would imagine that Esther is probably in this same predicament in this moment. Now remember, she has to confess something that she has done an excellent job at hiding. They knew that Mordecai was Jewish, but nobody knew that Esther was Jewish. This means that she was doing such a great job at hiding who she was that even though they knew Mordecai was Jewish and they knew that Mordecai and Esther were related, they still did not correlate that she was Jewish. This meant that she had to hide her nationality so well, living intimately among these Persian people, that she had to break virtually every law in the book of Moses. What does this mean? You see, to be Jewish was not just a nationality. This was a religion, but it was a religion combined with nationality. It was one. To be Jewish meant to worship the one true God, but it was also your nationality. We don't have a lot of that today. A lot of times we separate religion and nationality, but at this time, this was one. And to serve the one true God, this is before Jesus Christ. So there was a lot of rules and regulations, traditions, there was sacrifices. All of this had to be made so that they could stay close to God. So for Esther to deny her nationality as a Jewish woman also meant to deny God. And that means she had to break all of these laws that God had commanded the Jewish people to follow, like laws of ritual cleanliness or kosher food or special times of seasons of Thanksgiving and fasting. She couldn't have prayed publicly. She couldn't have offered any sacrifice for sin. She had to be void of all of those Jewish customs that would have marked her as a Jewish woman, which would have broken the law of Moses that God had given the Jewish people to follow in order to stay close to them. But I don't want to get stuck on just an ethnicity or a religion. I want us to understand that this was also about being a child of God. The Jewish people called themselves, because God called them, God's chosen people. So to deny that you are Jewish, both in nationality and in religion, meant to deny that you are a child of God, that you are God's chosen. So this is a big deal. Now, I'm just grateful that we don't have all these rituals and sacrifices for us to stay close with God. Once Jesus came, all that was wiped out. However, this was so ingrained in the Jewish people that it was just a part of life. So to actually deny this probably took some effort from Esther. We actually see in the New Testament that that was the battle that Paul and many of the disciples that came before him actually had, was people putting down these rituals and things that didn't matter anymore because it was about relationship, because it was so ingrained in the culture of the Jewish people. And so when we understand that, we know that this was probably hard for Esther to deny. But I'm actually thinking it could be harder at this moment for her to admit that she has been denying it. Because the only way for her to save her people at this point is for her to come clean to her husband. A husband of roughly about 5 years now that she has been hiding this deep secret that she is a Jewish woman. This man is unstable. We have already seen that here in this book. I mean, he got rid of a wife for not following one single command. What is he going to do to a wife that has been hiding a deep secret this entire marriage? Well, she is about ready to find out. And I imagine this is the moment where her stomach is completely in knots as she's getting ready to walk into this banquet and have to be honest and confess something that she is hiding. What she does have going for her is that 2 times previously, King Xerxes has said, "Whatever you want, even half of my kingdom, it's yours." And one of these was in the presence of Haman himself. And so could she get him to say it a 3rd time? Because if he said it a 3rd time, he wouldn't want to go back on his word because it would make him look even more like a fool. Well, let's find out. Chapter 7, verse 1 starts out with, "So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. On this second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, 'Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom.'" There it is. There is your 3rd time. And it mattered because he would not want to go back on his word. So let's see if Queen Esther actually takes this opportunity. In verse 3, Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king." Now, there is so much to unpack in these short couple verses of Esther's statement. First of all, did you notice how polite she was? If I have found favor, if it pleases the king. She has a 2-fold politeness. If I have found favor, if it pleases the king. But then she associates it with a 2-fold request. She asks that my life, and this is a 2-fold, the lives of my people will be spared. It's interesting because she requests it. She doesn't demand it. She says, "Save me and my people." But here is the moment where she actually links her own life with that of her people. And this is a major moment. From here on out, we're going to see Esther always say "we" when talking about the Jewish people. She is not going to separate herself from them at all. And she's doing this because this is not about herself. This is not about her saving her own life. This is about her saving an entire group of people. But one of these statements that she says in here kind of just bewilders me because she says, "If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet because that's a trivial matter." And I'm like, Esther, that's not a trivial matter. Why would you say that? But we need to understand that she is appealing to the king. If you could just not slaughter us, if you could just turn us back into slaves like we had been in Persia. Remember, it wasn't too long ago. It would have been her grandfather or her great-grandfather that would have been slaves in Persia. Not only that, the Jewish people had been in slavery multiple times even before this moment. They had lived in slavery and always come out of that as free people because of the hand of God. So perhaps she could look at history and say, if you could just sell us as slaves, or if we could become slaves within Persia, at least then the Jewish people could survive like we had in the past. But also, I think she's appealing to what the king could want. I mean, if you had thousands upon thousands of people that were free labor, wouldn't that at least counteract this offering of all this money that was supposed to go into the treasury because of all these Jewish people? Would you rather have money or would you rather have all this free labor? She's basically offering a better of a worst case scenario. But she's saying, please don't slaughter us. I mean, not only is she linking herself to that of a slave, saying, I could be your slave, but she's also linking herself to the slaughter. And this is humility at its finest. It was a necessary part of confession for her to be humble. She knew that just requesting a change of fate for the Jewish people without linking herself to them was going to be a lost cause. She had to confess. She had to be vulnerable, and she had to walk in humility to actually get the results that was needed. And I look at that and I think about this idea of confession, those hard conversations that we have had to have with people where we have had to confess. Perhaps it's not a sin, perhaps it's a change of feelings. I remember breaking up with boyfriends in the past, and it's just a nauseating, sick to your stomach feeling because you don't want to hurt somebody, but you also don't want to lead them astray. Confession is usually required out of us in hard moments, but it's best walked through with humility. I mean, Esther could have come on this scene and basically said, I am Queen Esther. I know you're not going to harm me because I am queen. Do you not see this crown on my head? I am just reaching out for these petty people over here. What do you think? Do you think we could save them? Could we work some magic over here? That is not how she is walking through this. There is not an ounce of pride in this whole speech. This is all wrapped up in humility. She is associating herself with these people because she is relating to them. As Christians, we should always walk through confession, even confession that doesn't have to involve sin, but especially confession that involves sin, with humility, because I don't know about you guys, but it's always received better in that moment. Now, I'm not talking about, oh, it's not you, it's me. We are not talking about fake humility. This is not about making somebody else feel good about themselves and us just being the scapegoat because it just gets us out of the tough situation the fastest. I'm talking about real humility. I'm talking about when you have to end a relationship and have confession and about your feelings of actually trying to leave that person better than when you originally found them because they feel the love and the care in your voice as you confess where you really stand with them. If we're talking about a matter of sin, I'm talking about going up to somebody that you gossiped to the day before and saying, hey, I really messed up. That was ugly what came out of my mouth. And I know that was actually had to come out of my heart. And it's something I need to really work through with God. But can you forgive me? Can you hold me accountable to make sure that doesn't happen again? We're talking about realness here. We're talking about humility that comes out of confession. And that is the realness that Esther is offering that actually could end her life associating with these people. We need to be willing to have that same form of humility when we enter into any moments of confession. When somebody confesses to me, I can tell where it's coming from, if it's coming from a place of fakeness or realness. And I am sure you can too. So let's make sure as we walk through this, we take a lesson from Esther and really walk through it with humility and vulnerability. Moving on from that for just a moment, I want to pull out something else in these few verses of Esther's request. Did you notice that she never said the Jewish people? She never identified which people she was or which people she was asking King Xerxes to save. Now, remember, Haman never did either when he initially requested King Xerxes to annihilate all of these people. He never said which group of people. So, did King Xerxes know exactly whom she was speaking about? Well, I would like to think that probably not. I would like to think that the king was still in the dark even in this moment. Why? Because you remember the day before, literally 24 hours, less than 24 hours prior, how he had honored Mordecai, which he called Mordecai the Jew, for saving his life. He put the king's robes on him. He had him ride around the king's horse. And he said, this is a man the king wishes to honor. If the king knew that he had already scheduled a date to kill Mordecai, would he be honoring him in the street? No, because he would look like a fool. And so I would like to think in this moment that the king didn't even know that this edict was still about the Jewish people. So when Esther refers to saving her and saving her people, the king probably is a little in the dark. And we're going to see that in the next verse. But I also believe Haman knew exactly what she was talking about. You see, she said, kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. Those were the exact 3 words used in the edict that Haman himself wrote. And those would trigger some things in his mind and go, oh no, he knew exactly what Esther was talking about in this moment. As Haman is probably shaking, King Xerxes says this in verse 5. He says, who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded. Now, this isn't like a small request, like, oh, who would do such a thing, Esther? No, like he is mad. This is a demand. Who would do such a thing? Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you? And in this moment, Haman has to be so nervous. But we're going to save Haman's reaction for next time because it's just so good. I can only imagine the thoughts going on in Haman's head right now. First of all, what? Queen Esther is a Jew? I mean, there was probably a shock and an awe, but also realizing that the king is furious, and the one man that the king is furious is at this dinner sitting right next to him. It's the one man that he thought he'd want to honor, but he ended up honoring Mordecai the Jew the night before. I mean, nothing is predictable in Haman's life right now. And now he knows that he is going after the one possession that the king loves more than him, and that is the king's wife. He has to be so nervous, and he doesn't know what Esther's going to say next to the king's request. And perhaps Haman is thinking of a plan in his own head. How can I get out of this? Because he was such a cunning man. But we're going to see that God is already working in so many details of this plan that Haman has written his own ticket through his own sin. But Esther in this moment has also written her own ticket. She has associated herself with the Jewish people so that if the king does nothing in this moment, she has a death date with them. There is no going back from this moment. But is there really a life for her if she just watches all of her people go down while she hides her true identity? Confession had to happen in this moment for Esther. Either way, whether it works out for the good or the bad, it was something that was required of her to be the person that she needed to be. And we need to understand that confession is not only for us to feel like we get something off of our chest. Confession is about our relationship with God. We actually see that it doesn't have everything to do with just the New Testament. Obviously, Jesus says, confess your sins and he will be faithful to forgive your sins. But we also see it even in Esther's time. In Numbers 5:7, it says, he shall confess his sin that he has committed and to make full restitution for his wrong. Leviticus 5:5, which had the laws of the Jewish people, says when he realizes his guilt in any of these and confesses the sin he has committed. But we also understand that this confession of her associating herself with the Jewish people, going back to what we spoke about at the beginning of this podcast, was not about her just confessing her sin to her husband. This was her coming clean to God and saying, I am a Jew. And remember what that means. I am a child of God. You see, when we confess, we say, Lord, I am your kid, and I know I am better than what I have done. Come and take this mess from me and fill it with something better. That is what confession does. It shows the ugliness of our heart so that God can come in and clean up the mess. When we confess with humility to other people, it makes us closer to God himself because he honors that. He asks us of that, to not hide who we are, to not hide the ugliness in our hearts, but to say, I am better than this. I'm a child of God and I want to confess and I want to come clean. And we do so with humility, just like Esther did. Now, that's all we have time for today, but I can't wait for our next podcast because we're going to see what really happens to Mr. Haman and all the problems that he has caused for Esther and the Jewish people. One thing I know is sin always finds you out when you don't walk through confession. But that's for next time. I hope you are enjoying our Esther series here on the Sweet Sycamore podcast.